on. And so over the last few weeks, we've been highlighting sharks, stingrays, turtles, seahorses, and so many more amazing creatures at that facility. Today, we are going to go under the bottom of the tank to see a diver in a stingray feeding experience. So we are joined live by Caitlin, an educator at the aquarium, and she's going to tell us a little bit of an amazing story today of what's going on with their stingrays. Thanks so much for joining us today, Caitlin, and take us away.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for having me. So my diver actually is very covered in rays right now. Oh, there he is. So this is actually the bottom of Ray Bay. In previous Explore by the Seat of Your Pants, we've done several spotted eagle ray feedings, which occur at the top. They're actually going on right now. So at the top of this tank, our spotted eagle rays are getting their enrichment and their food. And we do this to distract them so that they don't come down here and steal food from our other rays. I'm just gonna center Steve here a little bit. Perfect. So as I mentioned, yeah, we're at the bottom of Ray Bay. It is the second largest tank we have here at the aquarium. And as you can tell, it is full of stingrays. There's actually 4 species of ray in this tank. There's also 1 species of shark, which I will get to a little bit later. And then there's a handful of other, kind of a random assortment of other fish in this tank. So maybe we can get Steve's attention and just wave to him at some point. We'll get him to say hi to everyone. Now, Steve, during our dive show, is here to feed our larger species of ray. So the ones actually right above his head right now are southern stingrays. Oh, there we go. Hi, Steve. There we go. So if you notice that bucket he has right in front of them, that is full of their food. Today, they are getting some mackerel, some clam, which, spoiler, they actually don't really like clam, but it's good for their diet, so we give them some anyway, and some hake. Now, we also feed them several other varieties. Oh, there you go. Of animal, including some frozen squid, some herring. So we feed them a kind of variety of things in order to make sure they get all the nutrients and all the protein that they require in their diet. Now I'm gonna go through all of the species of stingray in this tank, starting from smallest to largest. So our smallest species in this tank is actually called cownose rays. There's one swimming in the center right now. They're these kind of gray, flatter looking ones with the triangular pointed wings. We've got many of them in this tank. We probably have about 40 of them in this tank. We do have both genders, so male and female in this tank. And currently we actually have 2 stingray pups in a small corral upstairs. They're separated from these larger stingrays for a few reasons. They're not very strong swimmers now, so we don't trust them unsupervised in the deep end. So we do try and separate them, but also they're not used to getting fed by hand by our divers. So we have to get them used to that upstairs with sort of some training essentially. And then when they're a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, we'll either keep them here at the aquarium or we will send them to one of our sister aquariums in the United States. We do tend to trade animals among aquariums to make sure that we keep our genetic populations very separate and that we try and alleviate any inbreeding that may occur. So those are our cownose stingrays. Now you see sort of in the top left area, swimming away from us, there's actually one of our spotted eagle rays. We have 3 in this tank that were given to us from one of our other aquariums in the US. So right now they are supposed to be getting their enrichment at the top of this tank. However, they are also very fond of trying to steal scraps from the rays that are being fed right now. So that's why you might see them kind of coming down here, seeing what the other rays are getting fed, and then trying to steal a little piece or two. But they are on a little bit of a special diet, so we want to try and make sure that we avoid giving them any food. So you might notice Steve trying to sort of gently nudge them out of the way. Now, the ones that are being fed currently, as I mentioned, are the southern stingrays. They are the ones right at the bottom of your screen right now. They kind of look like a big flat pancake almost. Now, all the southern stingrays that we have in this tank are female. So we've nicknamed them the southern belles of Ripley's aquarium. And they are female for a very specific reason. These lovely gals can have about 10 to 12 pups at a time. And we have about 12 of these southern stingrays. So if they were all to become mothers, we would just have way too many southern stingrays in this tank. So we do that for a little bit of population control to make sure that we're not going to get overrun with our southern stingray babies. Now, if you look right at the top, sort of center in our southern stingrays, you're gonna notice these holes in their head. Those are called spiracles, and that's how our stingrays breathe when they're in the water. So basically it works like a pump. They are able to pump water from the top of their body and then over their gills, which are on the underside of their body. And this is a great strategy for this type of stingray because when they are resting and trying to hide, they actually are very good at burying themselves in the sand. So in order to be successful at that, they need to have a way to breathe without getting sand into them. And that's why they have these spiracles, so that when they bury themselves, basically the only part of them you can see are those two spiracles keeping them breathing. And they're very, very good at it. Oh, Steve's gonna carry a stingray over to us. So there's one of our southern stingrays in Steve's hands right now. If I'm not mistaken, that is Corky. She gets her name from the corkscrew tail that she has, which I can get to a little bit later if you'd like me to touch on that. Now their mouth is on the underside of their body. I'll see if I can get Steve to do another feed off the glass at some point. And their teeth are actually they're very similar to sort of like a flat cribbage peg. I don't know if anyone knows what the game cribbage is, but they're very flat teeth. So they're not like the sharp teeth that you would think of from sharks. And they're very flat because our stingrays tend to eat lots of shelled organisms that have a hard exoskeleton around their body. And you could probably imagine if our stingrays had very sharp, pointy teeth and they tried to bite down on something that was really hard, they could break all their teeth off. Okay, so Steve is gonna try a wall feed for us. Saw my little signal. So yeah, their teeth are very flat and it's used to crush those shelled organisms. Here we go, maybe. All right, there you go. There you can see them eating their lunch right now and see their mouth working. And you can also see their gills opening and closing. Those are those sort of 10 slits on either side of their mouth. Perfect, thank you, Steve. I'm sure Steve would love an imaginary round of applause for that. Now you may also see the ones on the bottom sort of fluttering their fins and their wings around. Since they do eat lots of shelled organisms like crustacean and shellfish, those organisms would tend to be found underneath the sand at the bottom of the ocean. And so stingrays will flutter their wings around in order to move the sand and the sediment aside in order to find their food. Now, stingrays also have a sixth sense that works very well for this kind of strategy. It's called electroreception. Our sharks have that as well. And what this allows them to do is it allows them to sense small electric pulses. Now, when you move your arms or your muscles, every time your heart beats, that is caused by a tiny little electric impulse in your body. And our stingrays and our sharks can actually sense that. So this is very beneficial for them because it allows them to find those hidden foodstuffs that might be underneath a tiny layer of sand. So they're very, very good at finding their food, even if it tends to be buried and out of sight from the naked eye. So now I can talk about something you're probably all wondering about. Is Steve afraid to be in there with our stingrays? The answer is no. Steve's actually living his best life right now. So our stingrays do have something called a barb. That is the stinging part of a stingray. And despite that, they are very friendly and they're social animals. They're not harmful to our husbandry staff or to each other. So despite the fact that they do still have their stinger or barb, it's actually just a small serrated blade that grows out on the top of their tail. So it's kind of like, if you look at your fingers right now, it's kind of like how your fingernails sit on top of your finger itself. That's essentially how their barb grows in. And their barb is located in different places depending on the lifestyle of the stingray. So in our southern stingrays, the big flat pancakey ones we were talking about, their barb is about 1/3 of the way down their tail. So it's actually not their tail itself, as I mentioned, it sits on top of their tail. And the reason that it's located sort of 1/3 of the way down their tail is because they do tend to spend a lot of time lying on the bottom of the ocean. And you can imagine that if something were to attack them while they were lying on the bottom, it would tend to attack them from above. So this allows the stingray to tense the muscles in their tail and flick it upwards, where their barb would essentially become embedded in the attacker. Now, I do want to mention that, again, they are very friendly, they're very social creatures, and their barb is sort of a last resort defense. And the reason it's a last resort is that when our stingrays do use their barb as a defense mechanism, it actually gets ripped out of their tail, and it takes them several months to regrow that barb. So they don't want to really be swimming around in the ocean without a way of defense for a long amount of time. So they have to be very selective as to when they use that barb. And they're not going to use it unless they feel like it's a last resort for them to escape something that might be trying to eat them. Now, our spotted eagle rays actually can have up to 6 barbs, and their barbs grow in a little bit closer to their body. It actually grows in, same with our cow nose stingrays, right above where their tail meets their body. So it's a lot closer to their body. And this is because they have sort of an open sea style of life. They spend a lot of time swimming, very little time resting on the bottom. So if something were to attack them, it would likely come from behind them. And that way, having the barb located close to their body from behind is sort of the best position that they can use to defend themselves from a predator coming from behind them. Now, here at the aquarium, we do trim their barbs off every few months. As I mentioned, it does regrow every few months, kind of like your fingernails again. It's a very good analogy to think of your fingernails, because that really is what the barb is like. And so we do trim them off every few months. They tend to regrow every kind of 3 to 6 months. So it's a continuous process that we have to keep trimming them off, and then they regrow and we trim them off again. This doesn't actually hurt our stingrays. So we essentially just sort of do them one by one. We get them into the shallow area, and it's essentially like clippers that you would use to trim your dog's nails. And that's all it is. As I mentioned, it doesn't hurt the animal, and it's just sort of an added protection to make sure that we keep the other animals safe and they don't accidentally hurt each other. Now, our cow nose rays, I'm going to switch gears and talk about that smaller species again. They can, if you can see it on your screen, where are the cow nose stingrays? Oh, there's one right in front of us right now. It almost looks as if they're smiling. Now, right at the front of their body, underneath their eyes, they have these sort of flippers, for lack of a better term. It kind of looks like a shovel. A lot of people think that's their mouth. Their mouth resides on the underside of their body, just like our southern stingrays, but they do have these little pairs of shovels at the top of their body that are modified fins. And those modified fins are used to sift through the sand the same way our stingrays use their fins in order to find their food. So they do have slightly different strategies to accomplish the same goal. And our spotted eagle rays, which are front and center right now, have that pointed tip in their head, which is called a rostrum. And that, again, does the same function. It's used as a shovel in order to move sand and sediment aside in order to find their food, which would be hidden on the bottom. So again, a few different adaptations to essentially achieve the same goal. Now, you might notice some other things swimming around in this tank. We've got 5 bonnet head sharks. There's a few swimming around the top of your screen right now. These are the smallest member of shark in the hammerhead family. The ones you see in this tank are actually full grown. We'll wait until they come back. So they are quite small. They're only a few feet long. Now, I mentioned we have 5 of them in this tank. The 5 we have here are all female again. There's one sort of cruising around the top. I'll try and move this up to let you see. There she is. Now, my favorite thing to tell people about sharks, or these sharks specifically, is that the sharks you see in this tank will never ever stop moving. Now, can you imagine starting to run right now and then me saying, you can never ever stop? You'd be the most fit person in the world, but it's definitely not something that would be sustainable for me. Now, the reason our sharks will never stop moving is actually because they breathe by constantly moving. They are something called a ram ventilator. And that means they swim through the water with their mouth open. So that's actually what a lot of sharks do. And that's sort of one of the ways that they have this menacing portrayal in a lot of different streams of media. And that's actually how they breathe. So as they swim through the water with their mouth open, water goes through their mouth and it's pushed over top of their gills, where they take out the oxygen they need to power their body. So it's very, very cool to know that our sharks right here will never, ever stop swimming. Even when they're sort of sleeping, they're actually still moving around this tank. They essentially will shut off a half of their brain, but they'll keep swimming around, which is really, really cool to think about them never stopping. Now, if we get into some conservation issues here with the animals that you see in this tank, our sharks are actually, unfortunately, their populations are declining worldwide. And that tends to be a result of a few different things. One of the main conservation issues with sharks is still shark finning and shark fin soup. So unfortunately, humans will catch sharks and remove all of their fins, which are then used in several food dishes.
Sorry,
So
you're
there, yeah, sorry, no worries.
You're good, you're set.
Perfect, thank you. Now, another issue that actually affects our sharks and our stingrays, especially our spotted eagle rays, which are listed as near threatened right now with the IUCN, is bycatch. And I want you guys to picture a big fishing boat right now at home. Use your imagination, put on your imagination hat, and think of this fishing boat dropping out this massive net into the ocean. Let's say they want to catch some mackerel. And they drop this big net out into the ocean, and when they pull it back in, there's no real way for that net to just pick out the mackerel. So as a result, they tend to catch a lot of things that they hadn't originally intended to catch. And all of this extra stuff is called bycatch. And unfortunately, what happens to a lot of bycatch is those animals do die when they're being pulled into this fishing net. And that's actually what is causing a sharp decline in our spotted eagle ray species populations, is that they tend to get caught up in those large fishing nets and unfortunately don't make it when they're pulled into the fishing boats. Now, you may also notice there's a ton of other fish that you see in here that I have yet to mention. There are some snappers right at the top of your screen right now. There are some look downs, they just went to the top right of your screen. We do have a handful of random species of fish in this tank, including my actually favorite fish in this tank, who is a grouper. He was front and center earlier, but I'll try and point him out if I see him again. All of the other fish in this tank that is not a shark or a stingray is here by accident. People love it when we talk about mistakes we've made at the aquarium. This is one of them. When we first opened, just before opening, our dangerous lagoon tank, which these fish were meant to be in, was not really ready to house fish yet. And we got these fish into the aquarium. So we decided we're gonna put them in Ray Bay. And then when Dangerous Lagoon opens up, it's fine. We'll just move them over into Dangerous Lagoon. Well, clearly that didn't work. And we were underestimating how fast fish are. So we tried to get them out of this tank and put them into their actual natural home, and we failed completely. They are very, very fast swimmers, and we could not catch them when we sent our divers in to try and get them out of this tank. So now they're just here. The funny thing about these fish is that we do not feed them at all. They survive by eating all of the scraps from our stingrays, because as you might have noticed earlier, our stingrays are very, very messy eaters, and lots of scraps fall out of their mouth. The other fish in this tank, like the snappers and the grouper and the lookdowns, are very quick to gobble up those little scraps. And it's actually completely satisfied their dietary requirements. They actually should be on a touch of a diet themselves, because they are quite large in this tank. So there's a funny behind the scenes fact about how these animals are in this tank. Now, does anybody have any questions for me right now? I'm gonna stop and do some questions.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Caitlin, for an awesome presentation highlighting so many amazing things in your Ray Bay tank. For our live groups, yes, we've already got groups raising their hands. That's fantastic. You can raise your hand virtually on Zoom. Let me know in the chat bar you have a question. For everyone tuning in at home, and we have groups from New Jersey, Alaska, Peru, Chile, all across Ontario and more. Thank you so much for joining. Type your questions in the chat bar and we will take as many as we can. So let's start with a question from Mears Middle School in Anchorage, Alaska. What eats stingrays, Caitlin?
Ooh, that is a very, very good question. Thank you for asking. Stingrays actually don't have a ton of predators. It tends to be larger sharks, though, that will tend to prey on these species, especially the larger species that you see in this tank. It tends to be very large sharks that will prey on them. Aside from that, not a ton of natural predators.
Yep, there you go. Thank you so much. Let's go to Miss McKay joining us in Kelowna, British Columbia. Miss McKay, let's demute your mic and you're good to go. Take us away.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Caitlin. My student Ezra has a question. He said, how long can the aquarium last right now in our circumstance with visitors or people coming through?
Yeah.
We are actually doing just fine. Thank you for your concern. Yeah, so we do definitely have a reduced staffing here. However, our animal husbandry team is working, they're a little shortened, and we did that because they work on separate shifts. So we have half of our team that will work 3 days a week, and then the other half will work 4 days a week. So they never overlap, and then they'll switch every week, who's working the 3 days and who's working the 4 days. Now, all of our fish here are getting top-notch care all the time. We are a member of AZA, which is the Association for Zoos and Aquariums. And essentially what that means is that we get inspected on a regular basis. We provide top care to all of the animals in the aquarium, and nothing really has changed for them during this period of uncertainty. They basically just have fewer people walking in front of their tank. And I don't want to give them an emotion, but some of our fish definitely gravitate towards you more so than they would if other people were coming through the aquarium. When I walk through our gallery, there's definitely lots of fish that immediately swim up to the glass because it's probably some of the only movement they've seen in front of their tank all day.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to go to Ruby in Miss McInnes's class. If you have a question for us, come on up.
Hi.
Hi.
So, are there different, like, what are the huge species? Like, what are the huge species called?
Perfect, great question. I do think I forgot to mention our largest species here. I'm also going to take one quick second to mention that there is a stingray in this tank whose name is Ruby. So you have a stingray named after you, my friend. Now we have our two largest stingrays in this tank are called rough-tail stingrays. They were by the glass earlier. However, right now, one of them is swimming above this rock. There he is. That one with the short tail, his name is Mad Max. And somewhere in the back, we have our other rough-tail stingray. His name is Super Ray, and he's actually the oldest stingray in this tank. He's sort of in his late 20s now, so he's kind of our grandpa stingray in the tank.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, Ruby, for a great question. I'm going to go to our family joining live in Guelph right now. So we've got a group. So Sophie's group, let's go to you guys and demute your microphone. If you guys have a question in Guelph, go for it.
Do you have a question?
No, we don't.
Nope, that's okay. I can come back to you later. If you do have a question, you can let me know in the chat bar, okay? Perfect. Let's go to Piper then, in Miss McInnes's class. If you have a question, come on up. There you go. You're good to go.
Why are they like slimy?
I love that question. Thank you. So if you have been to the aquarium before and you have gotten the chance to touch our stingrays, yes, they are definitely slimy. Most species of fish tend to be quite slimy. They have a layer of mucus that coats their body. Now, does anybody know where you might have mucus? I'll give you a hint. It's up your nose. It's in a lot of bad places, essentially, that you would think of as a human. But in our stingrays and our other fish, it serves a very important purpose to have that layer of mucus coating their body. And it is a layer of protection. So you see some of the stingrays right now at the bottom of the tank. The rocks are very rough. And this mucus is just an extra layer that prevents their body from getting scratches on it and cuts, and it kind of protects them from anything that they might be swimming into.
Fantastic. Very cool. Thanks, Caitlin. All right. Lila in Mount Laurel, New Jersey wants to know if anyone ever has been stung at the aquarium ever.
That is a great question. Now, yes, We have had a diver get stung before. Jesse, you may remember Scott.
No.
He did get stung. And I do want to mention that this was while we were actually performing an ultrasound on one of our cow-nose stingrays. So its barb had grown in just a tiny bit. And in order to perform an ultrasound, what you have to do with our stingrays, and I should actually backtrack and say, an ultrasound is a way that we can tell if they're pregnant. So we were ultrasounding this stingray, and in order to ultrasound them, you have to flip them over, which you can imagine our stingrays aren't especially fond of that. So it did accidentally barb diver Scott in his hand, and Scott, Jesse knows Scott. Scott, this was probably the highlight of his life working at the aquarium. He was so excited that he got stung by a stingray because it had never happened before. He was fine, and now he's just got a great story to tell everyone. He came back to work right away. So yeah, he was definitely fine.
Fantastic, that's funny. But otherwise, it's never happened. So certainly if you're visiting the aquarium, there's no risk of you getting stung. And in general, with stingrays and all animals, if you respect them and you're kind to animals, you're in no danger of having any animal lash out at you in any serious way. But as Caitlin mentioned, their barbs are trimmed, so they'd have no capacity of hurting you anyway if you arrived live at the aquarium. I'm going to take some more questions from our live groups in just a second. For our YouTube groups, teachers, please do keep sharing questions. I'll take as many as I can. I really apologize. I would kick out the person who's been spamming relentlessly. Unfortunately, I can't. I apologize for that person who is childish and taking up all of your time. For our teachers in BC, Alaska, New Jersey, and more, we really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to your questions. I want to go back to Sophie in Guelph. If you have a question for us, come on up.
What are stingrays' favorite food?
Nice.
That's a great question. And I don't want to lump them all together because we've noticed that our stingrays have very unique food preferences depending on the stingray in the exhibit. So some of our southern stingrays will really like mackerel, and others will essentially spit it out in our face when we try and feed it to them. One thing that most of them across the board tend to really enjoy is squid. But aside from squid, it's really dependent on the individual and also even probably what they're thinking that day.
Yeah. Fantastic. I like that you mentioned that they don't really like clams, not their favorite food, but we do incorporate it into their diet because it's important. Just like Brussels sprouts at home. Eat your veggies.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, let me share two quick questions from YouTube. So Jennifer wanted to know, do the baby stingrays stay with you guys at the aquarium or do they go somewhere else?
That's a great question. The answer, unfortunately, is it depends. Early on, we have had many remain with us. However, now this tank is very much at capacity. And so we do tend to send some of our other ones to our other aquariums or other AZA accredited aquariums around the world. But I also want to mention that we don't just do this because we can't house anymore. It's an important, trading animals with other aquariums is very important to maintain genetic diversity. So it allows us to make sure that the gene pool is as diverse as possible. It prevents any inbreeding and anything that may result in genetic deformities, essentially.
Very cool. If you check out some of our past sessions with the aquarium, you'll see some of the baby stingrays in the top, and they're really cute, so I encourage you to check that out. All right, we're going to take 4 more questions. Miss McKay, I'm going to come to you next. If you have another one, go for it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, just came in. One of my students says, I was wondering if in a situation would a stingray eat another stingray instead of starving?
Ooh, cannibalistic stingray.
So it's kind of funny. The answer is probably yes.
Yep.
Fish tend to not care for their young very much. They tend to release their eggs and kind of just leave. And in many cases, they will go back and eat those eggs. And it would certainly happen in this tank as well. If we were to leave the babies in this tank, some of the bigger stingrays might actually try and eat them. So that's why it's really important that once we notice that we have a stingray that has been born in the aquarium, we get it up top into that corral, separated from the larger animals while it is small and vulnerable.
Fantastic. Great question, guys. All right, I'm going to go to Maya and Braden in just a second for our live group. I want to take a question from Claire in Waterdown, Ontario, and she wants to know where these stingrays live in the wild.
Ooh, that's a great question. You can find lots of these stingrays in warmer tropical areas. I did hear one of the teachers earlier mention Grand Cayman. I'm just gonna focus this on Herbert for a second. Just swim away. So you do find them in lots of warmer temperate waters all around the globe, really.
Fantastic. And that's something we've covered for all our programs. And when you go to the aquarium, if you ever get a chance to go to Ripley's aquarium, you'll find little bio facts of various tanks around the facility where you can learn more about the amazing animals that they have and where they're from anywhere in the world. So great question, guys. All right, I'm going to go to Maya now. If you have a question, let me just come on up and unmute your mic, and you are good to go. Oh, you should be. There you go. Yes, you're good to go. Hey, Maya. Do you have a question? Nope. Okay. That's okay. We can come back in a second if you've forgotten or if the mic's not working for whatever reason. We'll go to Braden right now. Braden, do you have a question, man? Let's see.
How many people are attacked by stingrays?
How many people are attacked by stingrays, Caitlin?
Ooh, that's a great question. I actually don't have a number for you. I will tell you that stingray attacks are very, very rare. Most of the time when someone gets stung by a stingray, it's because they've accidentally stepped on them. And you can imagine if you're a stingray, or even as a human, you've gone to bed, you're sleeping in your bed, and somebody comes by and steps on you. That is probably the most traumatic, shocking thing you can encounter while you're sleeping. And that's basically what tends to happen when stingrays will sting a person, is they've accidentally been stepped on and they kind of use their barb, again, as a last resort. Remember, this is very, very rare for them to use that barb. But that's a great question.
It is a great question. All right. I'm going to try and find a question amidst all the stuff on YouTube here. Sorry, guys. Give me 2 quick seconds. Dear. Oh, Alexa wanted to know, how many stingrays do you have at the aquarium currently?
Ooh, we have about 56 in this tank, if I can recall correctly. We also have one other rough-tailed stingray that lives in our dangerous lagoon. And now those are sort of this species of stingray, but we also have other tanks with rays in it. There's actually a tank behind me with freshwater rays in it too. So we have lots of members of the ray family in the aquarium.
Fantastic. All right. We got a question from William online, and then I'm going to come back to Maya in a second. So William wanted to know, how long do they live in the wild versus captivity?
That's a great question. It varies depending on the species. Just as a sort of general comment, the smaller species tend to have shorter lives than the larger species that you see in this tank. But most stingrays will live anywhere between 20 to 40-ish years in the wild. It does tend to be a little bit longer when they're in captivity. And that's also because these rays, as you can imagine, get things that stingrays in the wild don't, like vet checkups and ultrasounds and all those great things to make that allow us to monitor their health very well and also control their diet very well.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, Maya, I'm going to come to you and see if your mic works. And if not, then I'll just read the question that you typed in. Thanks for doing it in both ways. You should be able to say this. Let's see. Maya? Oh, maybe there's a delay. Yeah, your mic isn't working, my dear. So what I'll do is I'll share it. Thanks so much for typing it. So Maya's question for Miss McInnes's class is, in the wild, would any of the sea creatures that you have in the tank hurt the other ones?
Ooh, that's a great question. Thank you, Maya. I'm sorry that your mic isn't working. We found a way around it. The answer is probably not. Most of these animals would actually live in different areas when they're in the ocean. And you see that in the tank right now. There's some that are at the bottom, there's others that are at the top. So they do tend to inhabit very different areas, which would make them kind of not cross paths as often as you'd think. But yeah, probably not.
It's something that we've covered in your dangerous lagoon tank as well, the fact that why don't the sharks eat the fish? If animals are in an environment where they're kept well fed and they're healthy and they're happy, they have no need to eat the things that are around them. It costs a lot of energy to try and attack things that are near you. And if you're fed and provided for with food by the aquarium, which you guys highlight, there's no need for anything else. So great questions, guys. Caitlin, before we wrap up, what I want to make sure that we can do is share with the kids how they can learn more about what you guys are doing at the aquarium and some of the amazing fish you have online. So where can we send kids that want to keep learning alive after this program is done?
Well, thank you, Jesse. We have lots of resources that our education team, myself included, have put together for everyone while they're at home. You can go to ripley.aquariums.com and we have at-home resources there. We also have right now 4 live cameras up. Ray Bay is one of them, so you can check out this tank after this show as much as you want to your heart's content. You can also see our shark lagoon, our jellies, and our rainbow reef tank all live online. And then the education team tries to post live content every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 1 o'clock throughout the week.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So do check out those resources online, Ripley's Aquarium's website. You can also email us at home for our live groups. And for anyone on YouTube, you can check us out on our website to find out how you can ask more about Ripley's Aquarium. For what we do at the end of every session, Caitlin, as you know, is I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. So all our live groups joining us, you guys are ready to join me in saying a huge thank you to Caitlin for joining us today. You are all starting to be demuted. Go for it. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. We
Bye.
appreciate you tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day and check us out on YouTube for more great Ripley's Aquarium sessions. Bye, everyone. Thanks,
Thank
Caitlin.
you.